Radio TV phono nut here, and we have an Audio Technica AT-LP60X turntable from 2021. This is one that I bought off of eBay that I presume was a defective unit and a customer return. It was still in the original box and everything. It looked pretty good except for some scratches on the dust cover, and I'm afraid I probably put one or two on there myself during me working on it. But there were a couple of problems with this right out of the box. Number one, the tone arm kept cycling, and I found the reason for that was because one of the internal levers inside of the unit was placed in the wrong position from the factory. So I moved the lever back where it was supposed to be, and that got the automatic function working right. And then later I noticed by accident that the shaft on the motor was bent. Now the lever, we can chalk that off to a Friday job. The bent shaft on the motor, I have an idea that was sabotage. You know, some of these places when something is deemed defective or whatever, you know, heaven forbid anybody else get a hold of them and actually be able to do something with it, so they'll sabotage the equipment in some sort of way to make it difficult to impossible to get the unit working again. Well, I had a motor off of that Calibration 1005 AV that I EOL'd, so I just put that one on here. And then after the fact, I actually found a website that sells the Audio Technica Sanko made motors for these record players, and they actually have an Audio Technica part number. So I went ahead and ordered a motor. I'll probably just leave the original motor that I put on there in place until it dies, and then I'll have a spare. Now if you're wondering what all this is, I've converted this to 3-speed where it'll play 33, 45, and 78. And we have a variable pitch control with a center detent, which when the control is placed in the center, you have the correct pitch for 33, 45, and 78. But if you need to go a little faster or a little slower, as in the case of playing some older 78s that are not actually recorded at 78, you can do that. I'm not going to go into the whole procedure as to how to do this because it's basically the same as what I did to that Radio Shack Optimus turntable in a recent video. The only thing I will say is the Audio Technica motors, the motor control IC that's mounted to the motor is oriented in a different position than they are on some of the older turntables, so you want to take note of that. Pin 4 of the IC is your pin that you want to connect your center wiper of your 78 RPM trim pot to, so you just want to pay close attention to where pin 4 is. Now that brings us to the problem we have with this turntable. I had done a very long rambling video on this, and after uploading it and watching it, I didn't really like the way it was going, so I just deleted it and uploaded the Optimus turntable instead, and then said I decided to do a follow-up on this one. But anyway, the problem is, in order to play 78, you need a 3mm 78 Stylus, and I ordered the Pfanstiehl version that has a tracking pressure range from 1.5 to 3.5 grams. Well, this turntable tracks at 3.3 grams, and the Stylus was bottoming out. And the only way I could stop that from happening was to attach this wheel weight to the rear of the tone arm to get the pressure down to about 2.2 grams. Now the Audio Technica LP needle, and by the way, the needle was missing off of this, so I had to rob a needle off of something else. It doesn't bottom out. So I got to looking, and I found this needle from LP Gear for 78s, and it come to find out, I think they have their own needle manufacturing outfit. These are not Pfanstiehl generics, So I want to put this one on there in place of this Pfanstiehl 78 needle and see if it bottoms out. So first let's remove the wheel weight in the Pfanstiehl needle. And as you can see, the Pfanstiehl needle is bottoming out. It doesn't bottom out instantly. It takes it a few seconds for it to sag. Now let's take that needle off and put the LP gear needle on it and see what happens. As you can tell, the LP gear needle is doing nicely. It is not bottoming out. So let's go connect this turntable to an amplifier and see what it sounds like. And I like the fact that this LP gear needle comes in a little plastic box that can be reused. That makes a convenient way to store the needle when not in use. Unlike the Pfanstiehl needle that just comes on a little card. Now, I'm not going to discard the Pfanstiehl needle. I'll put it on another cartridge that I can use on a turntable with adjustable tracking pressure, because if I can get that needle down to about 2.5 grams, it'll work satisfactorily. And it sounds about as good as what I would expect it to sound like with a worn out record. Alright, here's another record. Here's our pitch control. What's on the griddle? When do all those sweet surprises start? Is holding hands on the menu? Well, that's what it hurts. And don't forget those kisses when you... Alright, shut up. So I'll have to make sure to get on the LP gear site and give them a good review for that Stylus. So my recommendation is, if you convert one of these cheaper turntables to 3-speed, and if it uses the Audio-Technica cartridge with the fixed tone arm, then I would suggest ordering the needle from LP gear instead of the Pfanstiehl 78 needle. And the one from LP gear wasn't really that much more expensive than the Pfanstiehl needle. Okay, I've got two motors. One is like what you'll find in a Crosley in your Iowa and a lot of your other old turntables. And pin 4 of this IC is what you want to connect your 78 RPM trim pot to. And on this older type motor, this IC is oriented so pins 1, 2, 3, and 4. So 4 would be down here. Okay, this is the new motor that I have on hand for the Audio-Technica turntable. And its IC is oriented in the opposite direction, so instead of pin 4 being down here, pin 4 is up here. So just keep that in mind when you're making the modification. I will put the schematic up at the end of this video, but for more information you can just look at my last video on the Optimus turntable, and that'll pretty much tell you what you need to modify any of these cheap turntables to 3-speed, whether it be an Audio-Technica or Iowa or Pioneer, Sony, Realistic, Optimus, Denon, or whatever, any of those turntables that use this type of motor where you have your 2-speed control pots built into the motor. Okay, here's the schematic of what you need to do to get 78 RPM out of your turntable. And first we need to look at the motor pin out. Now, regardless of whether you have one of the older motors or the newer motors with the IC oriented in a different direction, as far as I can tell, the external connections are the same for all these motors. You have pin 1, which is negative, pin 2, which is positive, that's where your 12 volts go in, and pins 3 and 4 are your speed control pins. In the normal configuration, when 3 and 4 is left open, you have 33 RPM, and when 3 and 4 is closed via the speed select switch, that speeds the motor up to give you 45 RPM. And on the motor you'll have two pots inside of the motor, one marked L, one marked H. The L pot is for 33 RPM and the H pot is for 45 RPM. Now before you begin this, you should probably obtain a strobe disc, whether you choose to buy one or print one for free off of the internet. And you'll need to get one that corresponds to the line frequency of your area. In North America, it's 60 Hertz. In other parts of the world, it's 50 Hertz. And you'll need an insulated screwdriver, whether it be one that's actually plastic or you take some tape and wrap it around a metal screwdriver. But we'll get to adjusting the pitch in a minute. But first, let's get this thing wired up. Okay, we take our motor, and you see we have our 12 volts coming in, pins 2 and 1. Coming off of pin 2, you want to connect the wiper of your 10K ohm external pitch adjust control to pin 2, and then the other end of your pot connects to a 2.2K ohm half watt resistor, and then the other end of that resistor connects to pin 3 of the motor down here, and then also connected to pin 3 is your center terminal of your single pole double throw center off switch. Now on the end of the switch that you choose to be 45, you'll connect a wire between that and pin 4. And on the other terminal, the other end of the switch, which will obviously be 78, you'll connect one end of your 300 ohm internal 78 RPM adjust pot to that terminal of your switch, and then the wiper of that pot will connect to pin 4 of the motor control IC, which is mounted on the motor. And remember what I said about the orientation of that IC. It's different depending on which motor you have. Now that you have everything wired up, it's time to adjust the pitch with your insulated screwdriver. First, you want to set your 10K ohm potentiometer, which should be a linear taper, preferably one with a center detent. And you can get those from Mauser Electronics. Set that pot to your center detent position. Then place your strobe disc on the turntable, and you should probably put an old record on the platter and put the disc on top of the record so you'll be setting the speed with the proper weight on the platter. Set your speed selector to 33, and then use your insulated screwdriver to adjust the L pot on the motor until the dots appear to be as stationary as you can get them. Then flip it to 45 and do the same thing for 45 using the 45 dots on your strobe. And then flip it to 78 and adjust this external speed pot. Well, I think I probably forgot to clarify. When adjusting 45, use the H pot on the motor. The L pot is for 33, and that should be done first. Then move to 45. And then move to 78 and adjust this external pot that's not part of the motor to the proper speed at 78. Now these are real touchy adjustments. Only a minor little tweak can throw the whole thing off, so keep that in mind. And then once everything is properly adjusted, your pitch should be correct no matter what speed your speed select switch is set to, as long as your external pitch adjust pot is in the center detent position. You should have the correct speed, and then of course it will slow down when turned to the left or speed up when turned to the right. If the opposite happens, if it speeds up when you turn it to the left, then simply unsolder the 2.2K ohm resistor from the end of the pot you have it soldered to, and move the resistor over to the other side of the pot. And then of course make sure your turntable uses a cartridge that has a 78 RPM needle available, and in the case of these fixed non-adjustable tone arms, I would suggest getting the 78 needle from LP Gear. It seems to work a lot better than the Pfanstiehl needle that bottoms out. Alright, I'll post a scan of this at the end of the video so you can study it, and this should get your Technica AT-LP60 along with a host of other lower-end turntables made from the early 1990s until the present day, that should get you to 3-speed operation. Now, I would not suggest taking on such a venture as a money-making opportunity, because if you think you can buy these turntables brand new and modify them to 3-speed and make money off of them, you're probably going to end up going in the hole, because you figure that needle was about $36, $37 with shipping. The cost of a brand new Audio-Technica turntable is about $100 to $125, depending on where you get it. And then figure $20 to $25 worth of parts, especially if you have to pay shipping on them. They'll be cheaper if you're fortunate enough to have a local parts house, but at any rate, the price to do this by the time everything's done from start to finish is going to be getting on up there. And if you have to charge, say, $250 to do something like this to make it worth your while, then most people are not going to pay that for an entry-level turntable when they could probably put $100 more with that and get the good 3-speed quartz-controlled Audio-Technica turntable that was manufactured to play 78 RPM. This is basically for those people who maybe wish to play 78s, who don't have a lot of money, and so you find one of these cheap turntables at a thrift store for $5 or $10, or maybe you already have such a turntable that you bought and would like to play 78s on it. This is an economical way to do that and it not break the bank. I mean, yeah, I'd like to have one of the new Audio-Technica turntables with 3 speeds, but that's not really in my budget right now. So, you know, that's just like these cheap turntables I've been modifying. It's stuff I've picked up for reasonable prices, and, you know, I can fix them up for not a lot of money and still have 3 speeds. If you're one that's going to get serious about doing archival work, I would suggest saving up the money and getting one of the better turntables. These little cheap turntables are basically just for casual listening of 78 RPM records, or maybe occasional transfers to the computer. But if you're going to get serious about transferring records to the computer, then you probably need a better turntable and a wider range of Stylus to go with that turntable, so you'll be able to transfer all sorts of different types of recordings.